Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Q&A from Howsham Parish Church. My name's Corrie Bromfield. I'm an apprentice youth ministry trainee here, and I'm joined by David Bourne and Rory Graham, the vicar and associate vicar from this church. And we know that coronavirus has raised loads of questions. So what we're going to try and do tonight in this little meeting is just to answer some of those and see what God and the Bible have to say. So, David, I think the first thing to realise is that coronavirus has made a lot of people really anxious, really scared. I mean, we've seen in the news today that only 1 in 4 of the children who are eligible to go back to school have actually gone. Why is there so much fear?
Okay, well, good evening. I think that in many ways, this coronavirus has left people feeling really vulnerable. And I think it's our vulnerability that is the key to why we're afraid, why we feel anxious. And if you think what we've experienced, our lockdown, the closing of borders, the banning of travel, kind of enforced isolation and all the rest, and our world, all that was familiar, that was stable, that was predictable, our security in many ways has been taken away. And as that's happened, we've also seen people who've been hurting, grieving, jobs under threat, people worried about their families, their livelihoods, and of course having to do that alone, because at least for some people there's been a kind of enforced isolation. And I guess that the speed with which things happened way back in March, when suddenly we were kind of into lockdown, the spread of the virus right across the world, and I'm sure that the 24-hour news coverage that, you know, every time you turn on your TV, there it is, and it seems like bad news. There doesn't often seem to be much good news, and with lots of voices offering us solutions and answers, but actually none of them offering really a great deal of hope. And I guess the strange thing as well is that given the statistics, we shouldn't be worried. I read somewhere that I think it's 1.35 million people get killed in road accidents across the world every year. And you think in the light of that statistic, we wouldn't dare go out on the roads, because actually we're far more likely to be killed in a road accident than we are to die of coronavirus. So it's a strange kind of phenomena where we can tell ourselves the statistics, but actually they don't have any impact in terms of taking away our fear. And I think at root it is this sense of being vulnerable, this sense of being suddenly finding ourselves powerless. So there you go. That kicks us off. I don't know whether Rory wants to come in and add anything to that.
No, just other than to say, I think it's really helpful, your observation that one of the things that's shocked us really, isn't it, is we've been confronted by the reality that we are all going to die. And that's been brought into very sharp focus when we're used to just not thinking about that at all. And I think the particular nature of the virus as well is such that it's unseen. So maybe to go back to the point you made about the road accidents, you know, we always think that won't happen to me because I'm a careful driver, or I'll look both ways before I cross the road. But with this, there seems, apart from apparently washing our hands and covering our faces when we sneeze, to be very little we can do to mitigate it. And on top of that, the thing I think that's causing uncertainty and anxiety is we haven't had an experience like this for 80 years. I mean, since the end of the Second World War, we have known unprecedented improvements and developments in our standard of living and healthcare and everything else. And this is shaking the foundations of our world, if you like. We're finding the things that we thought made us secure, so our money and the NHS and our families, suddenly those things are no longer necessarily the things that keep us secure. They, you know, in some cases, they might even be the things that transmit the virus to us. And so we're being hugely shaken by that, I think. And it's left people very, very fearful.
Mm. It's strange, isn't it, how things we've relied on, like technology of science, have been shown not to be able to fix everything. And our medicine, however good our hospitals are, and we thank God for them, but actually not able to heal everyone. And it comes back to that sense of vulnerability, but in the face of death, that sense of our own mortality. And you're right, pointing out, the things that have happened in the past. We haven't seen it for, anything like this for 80 years or so. But if you look back across history, massive pandemics, being a historian, I immediately go back to the 14th century, as one obviously would. And, 1346 and the Black Death comes, and you discover that 20% of the entire population of Europe and Asia are wiped out. I mean, some people say about 70 million, some 100 million, but a colossal impact that devastated. You've got what they call plague villages in this country, where literally most of the village got wiped out and the village was abandoned because of plague. And we charted that through kind of Spanish flu in 1918, but other things like Asian flu and Hong Kong flu and MERS and SARS and all the rest, of varying degrees in their impact. So in a way, we shouldn't be surprised that once again our vulnerability and mortality is exposed.
Well, thank you. Some of those are really quite terrifying statistics, and some of those things that maybe we don't think about that much historically, but also those sort of everyday statistics of road accidents and things like that. And when you stop and think, we see that actually that our world is in quite a mess. And I think that's something that's been really brought home to a lot of people right now in so many different ways. Our world is a mess. So
I think
why?
I think, Corey, I think that's so right. As you say, it feels like everywhere you look that it's as if the world is in a mess. It feels broken. I'd be saying that as a Christian, but I don't feel I need to try very hard to convince people of that. Relationships are broken, government is broken, nations are incredibly divided. Whether it's terrorism, war, and the latest real divisions, particularly in the United States, over the race issue. And everywhere you look, people, pointing out natural disasters that are happening. I guess when I hear that, one of the things that I always go back to are the words of Jesus. It's really striking. He's kind of questioned about a couple of incidents that have taken place, and he talks about their significance. One of them was an atrocity committed by Pontius Pilate. He was the Roman governor in Jesus' time. A massacre by Roman soldiers under his orders, and a kind of really horrible incident. And then he also talks about a tower which fell down, and how when that tower fell down, 18 people were killed. And it's interesting as you look at those two incidents, one of which, as it were, describing what we might call a natural evil, like earthquake, tsunami, cancer, coronavirus, a building accident, those kind of things for which there doesn't seem any rhyme or reason. And he talks about those, but he also talks about moral evil in our world, the violence, the racism, the abuse, the murder, the Twin Towers, the London bombings. Now, I guess as we respond to that, in some ways it's relatively easy as a Christian responding to moral evil. We can see where the problem lies. And I think most people out there can see where the problem lies. When it comes to the Twin Towers or the London bombings, you're talking about human evil. And it's easy to identify that. But what about the earthquakes? What about the cancers? What about the coronaviruses? And I think that's a much more difficult question for us to face as Christians. It's quite a challenge for us. Of course, often the two are related to one another. You can think about, the climate change issues and how our greed has perhaps led to forests being cut down, which has led to the growth of desert areas in different parts of the world, which in turn leads to drought and hunger and starvation. So there's that link between, as it were, our moral evil and the natural evil of the world. And I guess at a deeper level, if you look into the Bible sees that connection at a deep level, the world disconnected, the world broken, a disconnect between us and the world in which we live, a disconnect between you and me, that, we're in a world where wherever you look, there are relationships that are broken. And ultimately that relationship between me and God broken. So whichever way you look, it looks like a world that's in a mess. So I don't know whether you've got things to add to that, Rory, just to contribute to the mess, as it were.
Well, I'm always keen to contribute to the mess. I mean, we love the blame game, don't we? And various people have been identified as the blame game. So we've had, the WHO, we've had China, we've had, our government, 5G radio. I mean, there are as many people to blame for why the world is a mess as there are people with keyboards. But I saw one thing that I couldn't help, I thought was a really interesting illustration of the one person who we never blame, and yet who the Bible does say is at fault. And it was during the lockdown, it was a picture of a man sitting on a wall on Brighton seafront, and he was drinking beer in the sunshine. It looked glorious. And he was being interviewed by one of those really long boom mics that they do now, sort of from the 2-meter distance. And they said to him, there are lots of people out this evening. How do you feel about it? And he said, I think it's madness. I can't believe all these people are out. I mean, the virus will be spreading everywhere. And then there was a pause, and he said, of course, I'm all right, because all these people, well, they're my family and friends, so I'll be fine. And I thought in a moment, that's it. Yeah. When it comes to why is the world such a mess, I want to blame everyone else. The Bible has the startling honesty to say, sure, lots of people are to blame, but that I am to blame. Jesus says, out of the overflow of the heart comes all kinds of evil. Now, I granted, David, your point is well made, which is that's much easier to see when it is moral evil, as you said, but that actually the result of this mess in our world is because I have turned away from the God who made this world, and therefore everything is broken. And this is just a symptom of that ruination, if you like. So yeah, I mean, there will be endless, won't there, discussions, and there'll be commissions, and there'll be what could have done better. But the Bible has the terrifying honesty to say, yeah, Rory, you are part of the problem. I haven't directly, as far as I know, contributed to coronavirus, but that's the truth, and it's an uncomfortable truth.
It's interesting, isn't it, how the Bible narrows down, as it were, the reason for the mess is down to me, and as it were, my choice to do without the God who loved me and made me and designed me to live in his world, to find joy and peace in his world, living his way, and I choose not to do that. And so it's not surprising it's a mess. And I guess it's interesting, isn't it, when it's anyone wants to look up in the Bible, it's Luke chapter 13, where Jesus talks about those two incidents, the atrocity committed by Pilate's soldiers and the building that falls down. But actually, he says, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about natural evil or moral evil, your response needs to be the same. He says, you need to turn back to me. It's quite extraordinary that Jesus immediately, like a laser, focuses in, and he says, well, actually, you, David, you, Rory, you need to come back to me. Really strange.
And I think that's a really helpful answer to the question, isn't it? That you do occasionally, or perhaps less often than you might do occasionally, hear people say, "Well, is coronavirus God's punishment on me, on us as a nation, on us as a world?" And that, you know, in some ways, exactly what you said, Luke chapter 13, Jesus says, "You're asking the wrong question."
Yeah.
You know, the question is not, is God punishing us, me? The question is, how are you responding to what's going on in the world around you? Because, as Jesus says, this is a wake-up call for you to come back to me, for you to turn and to put your trust in me.
Yes, I think it's you know, the famous a quote from C.S. Lewis, isn't it, about all suffering of whatever kind being, as it were, God's megaphone, because most of the time we're not listening.
Yes.
So needing that megaphone, God shouting to us, "Come back to me, come back to me." You know, that suffering warns us of our mortality. It warns us of our vulnerability. It warns us that we're in a kind of a broken and divided world, and as it were, God calling us, shouting, pleading with us, come back.
And that's really helpful. It's striking, isn't it, to think, well, God is wanting us to respond to this. It isn't that God is just there is a God, and he is wanting people to do something in the light of our current experience. Not just sit there, not just sort of tough it out, but actually to realize who he is and what his character is, and to come to him.
No, indeed.
David, I'm going to ask you to expand a bit more on that, because if God is calling us back to him, well, where is the evidence for this God who is speaking to us? If this is God's message to us, how do I know that?
Thanks, Corey. I mean, I guess that comes to the heart of many questions that we get, the kind of, where is God in this coronavirus world? Where is he when all this suffering and mess is taking place? I think the first thing that I'd want to say as a Christian, not so much, it doesn't so much offer an answer to our pain, but it does at least remind me, as a starting point, that the God that I know, the God who loves me, is the God who himself suffers and knows all about suffering. It's a picture of the innocent suffering. So the God who comes, who stills the storm, who heals the sick, who feeds the hungry, who raises the dead, the God we see, the God we meet in the Lord Jesus. That tells me that God is not distant. That tells me that God is here in this world. He's not distant. He's not remote. He's not absent. He's not unaware, but he's here. And if you look at the experience of Jesus, he knows something of my experience. He knows something of my suffering. He knows something of what death is all about. I mean, just think what he experienced, the injustice, the bigotry, the hatred, deserted by his friends, betrayed by a friend, abandoned, all alone, all the things that, that we know a little bit about in our experience. He knows to the extreme, and suffering a death beyond imagination. The great good news that Christians have for the world is that we have a God who knows us, who hears us, who suffers with us, who dies our death. A God who's able to identify with us in our suffering. And I suppose that's just the starting point, that here is a God who is with us. But having said that, the great Christian good news is not only that I think that God knows and understands. But Jesus dying on the cross is about God beginning to put things right. And that's, in a sense, that's even better news. That Jesus dying on the cross is about Jesus doing something to restore that, to repair that brokenness, to restore that relationship, to make it possible for us to come back to God, to be, the great Christian word, to be forgiven. That's an amazing word. It's, we often talk about love in our world, but love can mean a whole host of things. But here is love for those who don't deserve it. For the love for those who've spent their lives ignoring God. And he chooses to love and to give and to suffer and to die in order to forgive us and bring us back to God, which to me is the most stunning of news for vulnerable, mortal, broken people like you and me. It's fantastic. Yeah, Rory, help me out. Say something at that point.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think I've got a great deal to add other than to say, Corey, your question was around the evidence, and I think one of the things that Christianity has so strongly on its side is it has stood up to over 2,000 years of scrutiny, and it continues to stand up to 2,000 years of skepticism, and it is growing across the world because there is evidence for the life and the death and the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ, and it can be examined. It doesn't require stunning education. It doesn't require, it is out there. This is not some kind of mystical secret. It is simply a case of opening the Bible, and anyone can begin to investigate the evidence that God loves us. And it has been the experience of millions of people, and it will be the experience of thousands of people even today, that they think the evidence for God's love is so strong that they commit their lives to following him. So it really is a religion that bears up the scrutiny. And I'd want to encourage anyone who was watching this discussion who says, how can I know? I'm not sure that God does, to say, well, investigate it. Christianity has nothing to hide from honest examination, if you like.
That's really helpful, because our message isn't kind of, I feel like this, but it happened. Jesus did it, and the Bible sets out for us in such amazing detail the historical evidence. He came, he died, he rose, and that's there. That eyewitness's testimony, that eyewitness evidence is there for us to examine. Yeah, it's great. Corey, where do we go next?
It's really helpful. One of the things you've both been mentioning in that last little bit was talking about Jesus, and Jesus knowing what death is, and Jesus experiencing death. And right now, death is something that is on a lot of our minds. The stuff that's been going on at the moment has really made us face up to our own mortality. So you've told us that Christianity, there's historical evidence for it. Does it have anything to offer, though, in the face of death?
Yes, is the short answer. It is a religion which is it is a belief that God himself came and died and was raised to life, so that everyone who puts their trust in him might enjoy that life beyond the grave. It's a belief system that is, I think, uniquely amongst world religions concerned with the death and subsequent resurrection of its founder, for want of a better word. So it has been the experience of Christians down through the ages that, to quote John Wesley, our people, in other words, Christians, die well. Why do they die well? Well, because they die well knowing that Jesus Christ, when he says, I am the resurrection and the life, promises a life in the face of death. I mean, death, one of the reasons we spoke about at the beginning, one of the reasons why we don't want to think about death is we don't really know what to do with it. Well, Christians do. Christians know that death, for those who are trusting Jesus, is not the end. In fact, it's the beginning of eternity, and an eternity which is real and physical and to be enjoyed, and far greater than anything we have experienced to date on earth. It will be an eternity without coronavirus. It will be an eternity without racism. It will be an eternity even more significantly with God, with the one who made us and the one for whom we are made. It will be tremendous. And therefore, Christians have been able, and are still, I mean, David, you'll know, as I have had, and as you will have done as well, Corrie, I'm sure, Christian people who have gone to their deaths in often incredibly unpleasant circumstances with a huge confidence and an anticipation that their best days lie ahead of them. So yes, Christianity has an enormous amount of comfort and to say generally about death.
It is extraordinary, observing Christians so often as death approaching unafraid, full of hope, even joyful. It's remarkable the difference that Jesus makes in the face of death. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you, David, with a bit of a biggie, in that coronavirus is horrible, and we've also talked about some of the other unpleasantnesses of our world. So Rory's mentioned what's going on in America right now, racism, climate change has been mentioned in passing. There is so much wrong in our world that we've acknowledged. And we've said that there is a God who cares for us and we can trust. So if he's God and he cares for us, why doesn't he just stop this from happening?
Okay. So it's the kind of question, I get it. Why doesn't God do something? I think the first thing to say is that he has. When Jesus came and died on the cross, that's that kind of stage one of God putting things back together again. And we do need to remember that. But if the question is, why doesn't God stop coronavirus, and why doesn't he stop it tomorrow? Because presumably if he's God, he could, absolutely. So the question is, why doesn't he? And I think the answer to that question would be, okay, he could, but then why doesn't he end all wars? Why doesn't he end racism? And he might say, great, okay, God, can you please do those things? So that's coronavirus, that's number one, all wars, number two, racism, number three. Okay, but you're still left with a broken world. What about envy? What about pride? What about anger? What about the things that, well, I think as Rory commented earlier, actually come out of our own hearts? The root of the problem, the root of war, ultimately, is the anger, the pride, the jealousy that's in my heart and somebody else's heart and somebody else's heart, which makes nations do what they do. So the question then becomes, if God is going to put everything right and put it right tomorrow, he can't just deal with coronavirus. He has to deal with you and me and our evil hearts. And if you're asking God to stamp out all evil in the world tomorrow, well, where do you want him to stop? And does that include me, and does that include you and our evil hearts? What I can tell you is that one day he is going to do that, because the promise is that one day Jesus is coming back to wrap up the history of this world, to come back as a judge, to bring the justice that we so much long for, don't we? We cry out for justice. We say every day, it's not fair. He's coming back and he will bring justice. We can look forward to that, but he hasn't yet. And the reason he hasn't done it yet, well, is that reason that he died on the cross. He died on that cross in order to bring you and me back to God. so that we wouldn't have to face the justice we deserve, God dealing with sin by eradicating it in that sense. But he gives us the opportunity to come back to him, to gives us the opportunity to face not the justice we deserve, but the forgiveness that he longs to give us. So why doesn't he do it? Why doesn't he put an end to coronavirus and all the rest here and now? Because he wants you and I to come to know him, to be his friends. And so he's delaying doing that. So Rory,
I think that
let you in.
I just think that I'm just going to say I think that's really helpful. I mean, what you're saying, David, is you're saying that he is doing something, and that's he's being patient.
Yeah.
At the moment,
yeah,
you helpfully said he has done something, which was deal with our problems on the cross. He is going to do something, which is he'll wrap up history and get rid of evil forever. And at the moment, he's doing something, which is he's being patient. That we have that chance to respond to, I think it was you put it, to the megaphone of God speaking now to the world through coronavirus and saying, "Come back to me."
Yeah, to which we need to be saying, isn't God kind?
Yeah,
that he's being so patient with us and with this broken world, this world that most of the time doesn't want to know him, turns its back on him, and so patiently he kind of reaches out and welcomes us to come back. Yeah.
Brilliant. So when I am feeling anxious and afraid and I don't really understand what's going on in the world and I don't really understand what's going on in my life right now, and coronavirus seems to have messed it all up, where is the hope?
Okay, I think in the kind of things we've said to this point, there's two big things that have come out. Number one is that God loves us. I think that's the first thing. I mean, isn't that stunning? The most, we kind of underestimate it, but the most wonderful, powerful thing is to know that we are loved. No matter what, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what's going on in our lives, no matter what we're feeling, the God who made this universe says, when Jesus dies on the cross, he says, "I love you." And that's got to be good news, hasn't it? That's got to bring a smile to our faces. So that's the first thing. Because of Jesus on the cross, we know that God loves us. And I guess the other thing we've already seen is because Jesus rose again, death defeated, we know a God who's in control, a God who is bigger and stronger than death itself. I'm going to be looking on this Sunday when for our virtual service, I'm going to be looking at the time when Jesus was with his friends on a boat crossing the lake, and this huge storm blew up, and the boat was filled with water. Friends of Jesus, they were about to drown. And I mean, there's two things that hugely stand out in that story, and that's the power of Jesus. I don't know whether you realize what he did. He stood up in the boat and he kind of shouted at the storm and said, "Shut up." And it did. I'd love to have a go at that on Eastbourne seafront one day in a storm. And I pretty much know what's going to happen. I'm going to get wet. But when Jesus said those words, the wind stopped, the rain stopped, the storm was stilled. And yet at the same time, you see Jesus with such incredible compassion, love for his frightened friends who are absolutely scared out of their wits. So here is this God we meet in Jesus, this God who loves us to death and who has absolute control even over our biggest enemy, which is kind of death itself, isn't it? And all the things which make us so much afraid. Jesus is bigger than them. He's bigger, he's better, he's stronger. Yeah. Or feel like breaking into one of our kids' choruses that our kids' songs we sometimes sing at church about how big and strong and mighty is Jesus. Yeah. Does that help, Corey? So that for me is the reason we have to hope. Jesus who loves us, Jesus who's in charge of everything. Yeah,
that's brilliant. And yeah, it sounds absolutely wonderful and so very exciting. So the question is, what do I do with that? How do I get to know this Jesus?
Well, I mean, I think the tremendous thing is that what David's just said is that, you know, Jesus's love is a love that causes him to act. So it isn't just that Jesus feels very strongly about us, or that, you know, Jesus wishes nice thoughts for us. It's actually that he has made a way for us to be friends with him, to be in a right relationship with him, and that's through his death on the cross. There's a lovely story there's lots of lovely stories in the New Testament. There's a story that Jesus tells in the New Testament of a shepherd who loses a sheep and who goes off searching for that sheep and finds it and carries it home and says to his friends and neighbors, "Rejoice with me, look, I've found my lost sheep." But ours is a God whose love takes him to the cross, and makes it possible for those who aren't currently his friends to be friends with him. And so I suppose anyone who was thinking, I'm interested, or I'm not sure, can know that they can come to Jesus now, very simply, very, very easily, by saying, "Lord, I'm very sorry for the way in which I have treated you. I believe that Jesus' death on the cross was for me. Please come and help me to trust him and live for him." It's a very simple thing. It will have a huge impact across all of your life. Now, it's quite possible someone listening to this might be saying, "Well, I'm certainly not ready to go that far, but I would be interested in knowing more," in which case we'd love to help with that. And I'm sure, Corrie, you can tell us one or two ways in which they could develop that thought or take that on. I don't know, David, do you want to say any more on that? Is that a reasonable answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of ways of thinking about that, but it's just this amazing offer of new beginnings. I don't know whether it's helpful. You might find this helpful. I think someone was talking about the way that when you picture the coronavirus, it looks like a crown. And I guess there's kind of like two crowns, aren't there? We can either wear the coronavirus crown or whatever it is in this broken world that causes us to fear, to feel vulnerable, to feel unloved, whatever it is. There's those things that can sit, as it were, like a crown on top of us. Or there's this amazing king called Jesus who loves us. He's the king, he's in control, but he loves us. And that's the other crown that we can, as it were, choose to wear to identify with Jesus. And it's the crown that makes all the difference. You know, one, the virus crown leads us to fear. Jesus' crown leads us to joy and hope. It's, brilliant.
Really helpful.
Lovely. Well, David, Rory, thank you both so much. It is such an encouragement to know that when the news is full of anxiety and people are worried, there is real, genuine hope out there. And it's been great to talk to you guys about it this afternoon. Thank you for tuning in and watching this video. It's part of our week of Life in Lockdown at Halsham Parish Church. There'll be loads more videos available on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. There's lots of little stories of people's lives, their real lives in lockdown, and the difference that Jesus has made to them. So why not check some of those out? See how he does change real people's lives. And as Rory said, you may have some more questions, you may want to find out more. There'll be a slide at the end of this video with an email address on there. You can get in touch with us, you can ask us your questions. And if you're interested, on Monday evening for 3 weeks, we'll be starting a little online course called Hope Explored, where you'll just be able to meet in a room a bit like this online, just to chat and to find out more about who Jesus is and what he's done. And if that's something you might want to try, then just drop us an email and we'd be really happy to get in touch with you. So just leaves me to say goodbye on behalf of everyone here at Halsham Parish Church. Thanks.
Right. Yeah.
Bye.